Hello and welcome back to another session on methodology of literature. We have completed formalism and we shall begin with new criticism, and we continue with our module 2. Okay, so new criticism is one of the most noteworthy movement in the 20th century. It effected a total transformation in the literary studies as such, and they were entitled, or they were given this new shift or a change in the criticism itself. They were given the name new because they were totally different from the other theories that were given to us by the liberal humanists. So till then, till the Victorian period, we had liberal humanist criticism or liberal humanism. So this was a total change, a totally different movement from the past literary studies, and therefore the word there was a lot of emphasis on the word new, and that is why it's called new criticism. I did tell you that they had a lot of similarities with Russian formalism as well. Now the Russian formalists, they believed in the words, form. It was all about form, right? For them only the text mattered. Whatever was written in the text, the words in the text, that mattered to them. It was all about the form, the structure of the language, how it evoked images and sensation in the mind of the reader. So likewise, the new critics also followed a similar pattern. Whether they influenced each other is debatable, we don't know. But anyway, these two schools of thought began almost in a similar period, and they had a lot of similar features. Now, when it comes to new criticism, again we deal with two important schools of thought, and they are the practical criticism or the modernist criticism that developed in UK, in England, and the new criticism which developed in United States. Now, the modernist or the practical criticism was influenced by René Welk and Roman Jakobson, and they had migrated to America. They had been associated with the Prague linguistic circle, the Russian formalists, the Prague linguistic circle or intellectual school of thought. Now, so the modernist or practical criticism, they were influenced by René Welk and Roman Jakobson. Okay, and in America, new criticism was also another movement similar to the practical criticism, and that was the movement that became very popular as well. Anyway, this was influenced by the main critics of this group were John Crow Ransom, Alan Ted, Cleanth Brooks, Robert Penn Warren, and many more. Now, they are identified with the new criticism. Okay. Anyway, both these criticism, that is practical criticism and new criticism, they shared similar ideas or similar features. Now, before we move on to what new criticism is all about, a little bit of history. Okay, be patient, because unless you understand how it evolved or the reason for its evolution, you will not be able to understand or comprehend it in depth. So just a little bit of history. So I'm not going deep into it, but a little bit. See, trade and industry in both these countries, that is US and UK, had shown phenomenal growth. But when you look at literary art and criticism, they had not been able to keep pace with this. Another thing is, in academic circles, there were a lot of discussions and debates, and whether they have to lay emphasis on history or criticism, or on the background, on life of the author, or on the work itself. So this is how slowly it was the beginning of a new way of looking at the work of literature. The earlier liberal humanism or the humanist theories failed to give or failed to scientifically explain. They gave a lot of theories, they gave a lot of importance, or they stressed on how a poetry should be, how a poem should be written, what critics ought to be, and all that. But they were not able to scientifically prove its formations. So with the coming of T.S. Eliot and his seminal work, Tradition and Individual Talents, he scientifically, or he tried to see the formation of art in the mind of the poet using a catalyst formula. He proved or tried to prove how impersonality of the author works. He gave, through his catalyst formula or his catalyst experiment or the formula, he slowly moves from the liberal humanist theories to bringing the literary criticism to be scientifically tested and proven. So that was the beginning of the new style of criticism, where emphasis on the scientific side was given. Now, these people, that is the new critics, were greatly influenced by Matthew Arnold, T.S. Eliot, and I.A. Richards. Now, what is new criticism? If you look at the slide here, you will understand the text is everything. It is a complete work of art. It is an example, it's example to validate our interpretations. It is a source to analyze and get true meaning. So text is everything. You don't have to look at anything external to the text. Everything is within. It is self-contained. Okay. Now, you have two schools of criticism. They are practical criticism and new criticism. Both these criticism have similar features. They are both similar. The practical criticism was influenced by I.A. Richards in United Kingdom, and new criticism was influenced by T.S. Eliot in United States. Here they tried to emphasize on the language of the text than its author. It was on the intuition of reading, the intuitions that come to the mind of the reader, or the how, and that too it is the outcome of trained, aesthetically sensitive critics. The term new criticism was coined by J.E. Spingarn, who was an authoritative historian of the Renaissance or Renaissance criticism. John Crowe Ransom borrowed this title to his book New Criticism. So that is the beginning of new criticism. They were greatly influenced by T.S. Eliot, and the great pioneer or the great critics of this new criticism was where John Crowe Ransom, Alan Tate, then Cleanth Brooks, Robert Penn Warren, and so on. So John Crowe Ransom, he titled his book New Criticism, and he used this term to bring under a common umbrella the critical thoughts of intellectuals like T.S. Eliot, I. Richards, and others. Now, I did mention earlier that they were greatly influenced by Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold was a Victorian critic and a poet, and he is famously known for his touchstone method. Though he is a part of the liberal humanists, he in fact had a totally different view that it greatly influenced T.S. Eliot. Arnold places poetry in a much higher rank than religion, science, politics, and philosophy. He believes that ideas presented in poetry are infallible. He thinks that only poetry can offer any kind of spiritual or emotional outcome to man. It is the only viable method of interpreting life. But if poetry is to serve this great purpose in the society, then we have to have a higher order of excellence. Every one of us. We must have a higher order of excellence. Our judgments of poetry must have a higher standard than any other disciplines. Our judgments and the parameters that we use to judge poetry should be higher. Because poetry can sustain and delight man. If it is said by Arnold that poetry can sustain and delight man, if so, only the best poetry should be created. Because creating poems has an immense, or by creating a poem, the poet has an immense responsibility of shaping man. So the reader should be extremely critical about what he or she reads. Because reading suddenly influences the mind of the reader, and therefore he should constantly judge whether the poem is for his benefit or not. So how do we judge a poem? That's the next question. Arnold says that the reader should be able to identify whether the poem is good or bad. See, all this while Arnold has been stressing on one point, which is that poetry is given a higher rank than any other disciplines, than religion, than science, than politics, than philosophy. And it is very important in shaping man. It has an immense responsibility of shaping man. So only good poems must be given to man. And how do we judge? Who judges whether this poem is good or bad? It is us readers who judge whether the poem is good or bad. Now how do we judge that? He should be able to, that is the reader should be able to tell or identify whether the poem is good or bad. First important thing. Secondly, he should be able to tell or identify whether the work falls short in terms of language and meaning. And he should concentrate not only in its good points but also try to discover its faults. According to Arnold, the reader needs to bring objectivity to his analysis of the poem. He feels that judging a poem in terms of historical and personal fallacies is fatal. What is fallacies? Fallacies? Error. So if you are to judge a poem in terms of his history and personal likes or prejudices, then you are likely to have an error in judging the poem. Now this was of great importance to the new critics. This was the beginning, you can say. So what is this historical fallacy that Arnold is speaking about? See, very often we judge a writer's work in terms of his reputation, either because he is well known or because of certain biographical details that we read about him, or because the author has put in a lot of effort in composing the poem. Or it could also be that the poem has become important because of the role it has played in politics or national literature. And therefore, these kinds of judgment will focus attention to works that actually do not deserve any importance. We are deviating from the text. We are giving prime importance to that particular author because of his reputation or because he has composed the poem basing it on the present day politics or the contemporary politics of the day, or it is a part of the national literature, or it is because the author has put in a lot of effort, or we have read a great deal about the author in any biographical details or in some biographies. So what happens is we come into an error in judging the poem. We give prime importance looking at all these things about the poem rather than concentrating on the words of the text, words in the text or words in the poem. So that is historical fallacy. The next one is personal fallacy. Now what is this personal fallacy? Personal fallacy, this is exactly what happens in personal fallacy. The same thing that for what we spoke about, historical fallacy, it's the same thing that happens in personal fallacy also. Now what happens here is they judge these work of literature, the judgment is done by whom? By literary men. We studied that in literary canon. I hope you remember. Earlier, the Western canon had only those, it was all about the hierarchy. It was Euro-centered. It had nothing to do with the post-colonial writings. It had nothing to do with the LGBT writings. All these were excluded, yes, in the earlier canon. Why? Because those men were, they based and not only that, if it is if the syllabus or if it is it forms a part of the syllabus of great universities, then that work is considered to be a great work. So these are all errors, right? Likewise, here in personal fallacy, what happens is these judgments are done by literary men. They judge these work or the texts according to their preferences and what they believe. They may like certain authors, they may hate certain authors, they could be conventional and therefore they may believe in the parameters of or the conventional parameters of literary judging a literary work, and therefore they may not accept any new type of genres. And what happens to the work? The work again gets eliminated. So they judge the work according to their personal preference. This is called personal fallacy. Again, what happens is there is an error in the judgment. According to Arnold, both these fallacies will bring wrong judgment. Arnold says that in order to understand a good and bad poetry, or in order to understand or differentiate between a good and bad poem, we must apply the touchstone method. We are not going to go into the touchstone method because it is not relevant to you, Therefore, you just bear this in mind. The touchstone method was a concept formed by whom? Matthew Arnold. Okay. Now, this concept or this touchstone method, not just the touchstone method, this concept of objectivity, this is called concept of objectivity by whom? By Matthew Arnold, and this had a great impact on T.S. Eliot. Here we have T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is a famous 20th century critic and poet, and he is noted for his concepts on impersonality of the author, objective correlative, tradition, yes, which we shall be studying in detail in the next semester. Now, T.S. Eliot had a great, or he influenced the new critics. So from Arnold itself, we see the features that is depicted in the new critics. Arnold also the objectivity, the concept of objectivity, which was later taken up by T.S. Eliot. All this formed, or all this had a great impact on the new critics. Okay. Now, T.S. Eliot, however, he can be considered the pioneer of new criticism, and he was influenced by Arnold. However, he mockingly called the new critics method in the beginning. He mockingly called the new critics method as lemon squeezing method. He opposes lemon squeezer critics. Now, who is this lemon squeezer? What does it mean? It means that the critics, see, new criticism is all about the text. Every single word in the text is taken and analyzed. According to Eliot, or if you try to take word by word, or if you try to take every word written in the poem, if you try to give importance to every word in the poem, if you focus your attention completely on each and every word in the poem, you may end up giving a wrong interpretation of the poem. Okay, it is the critics who try to squeeze too many meanings from the text. He says that the critic must not do that. He must not get indulged with trivialities. That is, the smaller things must be left as it is. You shouldn't, because that might spoil the beauty of the text or beauty of the interpretation. You may come to a wrong interpretation. So he warns against this lemon squeezer or squeezing method. Okay, all right. He also opposes the romantics idea of opinion and fancy. Now, S.T. Coleridge and Keats, S.T. Coleridge, Wordsworth all have given various ideas or various important ideas on imagination or how poetry must be written. Eliot in fact the whole criticism, new critics, they tend to be a critique of the romantic ideas. He sees it as a mistake to reduce the study of poetry to such unconnected technical and rhetorical accomplishments. Basing the reading on author's intention tends to deviate from the real text. So the example is John Middleton in Keats and Shakespeare. Now, Middleton tried to focus his attention on Keats's letters. Okay, and therefore what we have, or what eventually the outcome eventually was that it was more or less like a historical text rather than concentrating on the poems of Keats. He deviated from the text. He moved further away from the text, and it looks like a biography rather than concentrating on the text. Okay, so Eliot opposes this idea because it deviates from the text, and it ends up giving absolutely no connection whatsoever with the poem concerned. Now, his works, as I told you, the work his works influenced the new critics and even guided them. Tradition and Individual Talents by T.S. Eliot is a seminal work, and his theories on objectivity, scientific emphasis, impersonality of the author, medium as a focal object of analysis were all important influence, or we all had a great impact on shaping the new critics. Now, we now move on to I.A. Richards, who is yet another very important critic, and he is considered to be the pioneer of practical criticism in United Kingdom or in England. He was a professor at Cambridge University, UK, and he later moved to Harvard University in the US. Now, he is well known for an experiment he conducted while teaching at Cambridge. This experiment had a profound influence in shaping the theories of the new critics. He gave his class, one day he just comes to the class, and he gave his class a number of poems and asked them to submit readings of these poems. There was, however, one thing that he did. The poems he offered his students were devoid of any reference that might allow them to connect the poem with any particular author or any socio-historical context. Nothing. No details were given to them. Nothing about who wrote the poem, nothing about the era in which the poem is written, nothing about from where this poem is taken, which part of the world this poem is taken. Nothing was provided. When the students gave him or finally submitted their analysis, Richard was disappointed at their stock responses. Their responses had very little to do with the poem given to them or the text that they encountered. So again, this attempt or experiment with this nameless, contextless poems is again a critique of the Romantic theory, but even more radical than that of Eliot. So here we see the new critics turning the root of how to judge or read a text. It is against subjectivity, a critique of the Romantics, a subjectivity that the Romantics were noted for. They are going against it. It is for objective reading of the poem. Arnold suggests this in the beginning itself. What matters for Richards are just the words on the pages, and this intensive concentration of the text forms the hallmark of the new kind of literature or the new kind of literary criticism that Richards initiated, known as practical criticism. Okay, and the reading strategy under this is known as closed reading, which we will be taking up soon. Practical criticism. So what is practical criticism? Practical criticism was initiated by I.A. Richards. His important works are Principles of Literary Criticism and Practical Criticism. His seminal concepts are emotive and referential language and close readings. Okay, so what is emotive and referential language? What does it mean? Okay, what do you understand by emotive and referential language? Now, according to I.A. Richards, in his work Principles of Literary Criticism, in his book, Principles of Literary Criticism, he says that language can be used in two ways. One is scientific way of using the language, and the other one is emotive way of using the language. Scientific way is otherwise referred to as referential language. See, whenever we want to talk about facts, we generally talk about true or false. We generally talk about whether a particular thing is true or not. For example, sun rises in the east, it sets. Okay, so it is a scientific fact. What if I am to say sun rises in the west? It is not. So what I do is I present the truth. So scientific use of language or the referential use of language, facts are talked about or facts are spoken. And this may be used for reference also. So scientific language is used for the real world, the factual things. Our studies, our talks, perhaps at the supermarket, enquiring something, where we are looking for something. So it's all about facts, it's all about information and nothing else. That is called scientific or referential language. And what about emotive use of language? What do you mean by emotive use? Emotive use of language or uses emotions. They generate emotional feelings in the readers. Poetries and stories are full of emotive language. Okay? So I hope the concept is clear to you, and I want you to turn to page number 40. We have discussed the whole page in these few slides. You can come to the second paragraph, where he speaks about, he attempted to articulate special characters of literary language like the Russian formalists, differentiating the emotive language of poetry from the referential language of non-literary discourse. That is what it means by emotive and referential language. I have already explained what emotive and referential language is. And then come to the third paragraph. When you come to the third paragraph, page 40, third paragraph, you will also see what Eliot has to speak about opinion and fancy. So all these are already spoken about, okay, or discussed in the slides. Closed reading or close reading, we have a topic as such, and we shall be discussing the topic in detail. All right, and so this is I.A. Richards. All right, so we shall stop for today. Thank you for listening.
Jamendo.com